so long that we've now gotten a craft service table. We've employed craft services. Jeremy's off hydrating, making sure he's ready. The craft service guy, Mike, we hire him from time to time. He's gotten us, he gets the cold cuts in there. I mean, normally it's all right. I mean, he's got to go between two different countries to provide, craft services for the podcast. But for a podcast that only creates maybe one episode a season, Jeremy's had enough of my nonsense. All right, folks. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, hello, and goodbye. Yeah, it's been a minute. My name's John. Welcome to Karate Without Belts, everybody. Jeremy, how the hell are you doing?
It's been quite a crazy month. I'll say that much. So.
What, July or August?
Anymore, it all runs together anymore. It's like it's August or something.
I'll take that. Yeah. We just
Jugus, whatever.
Condense it into just one season. I think that's kind of a better way to do things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody who's been listening to our RSS feed, I've been throwing some training logs up there every once in a while. I was trying to kind of make it a daily thing, but always time for that. Anyway, Jeremy, what have you been up to lately in terms of training? I know you've been trying to stop nuclear reactors from exploding, but
kinda. I mean, yeah, it's well, I'll be perfectly honest. I've been really, really busy with work, so I mean, I have not even had time to train, just with the amount of overtime getting called in, and then on top of that, I hadn't even told you about this. Had a tooth break off and ended up having an emergency root canal. So yeah, that was fun. So
the joys of getting older.
I don't know about that, but for at least a couple days, after it, I was feeling absolutely no pain whatsoever. So hey, all right, cheers.
Hooray!
Drugs. Yeah, exactly. So
we are pro Novocaine on this podcast. I can feel you on the busy side of things. I was doing 65-hour work weeks up until, I want to say, last week. Yeah, or the week before. It was like 65 hours. And then I worked 25 hours last week, and I said, I'm done. And I'm going to a different city for a little while. And I did, which Jeremy got to hear the lowdown on. Apparently, you can, in fact, exchange plane tickets for train tickets. I had a 5-day training week this week, though, so I feel pretty proud of myself, if I can say that. One thing we were talking about prior, kind of off air, when we were doing our annual planning sessions, which is interesting to think about this because you're the one who taught me everything around this, and then for me to just kind of go back and a couple of years later and be like, do we really need any of this? What's the point of any of this?
I think it's a great subject, especially now, and it's something I think needs to be covered. So,
and I think that I'm also seeing this in latest where I just created or just remade a Bo and a Joe in 20 minutes, just giving a small hacksaw, 2 dowels, and sheet of sandpaper. I remade a Joe and a Bo that I didn't have. I didn't have them for a year or so. And in 20, 30 minutes, kaboom, instant Bo and Joe. Pretty simple, pretty easy, pretty universal. I think we can say anybody who does weapons, anybody who does anything with Kobudo, you're doing something with Bo or you're doing something with Joe. Right? Maybe not both, but you're doing something with one or the other.
You're doing something with a stick, bottom line.
Yeah. If you're a nice guy, you do something with smaller sticks. There's that too. But then we're getting into, if we think about things that are more specialized, require more material, require more skill to create beyond those materials I just mentioned that are, I don't know, not even 10, $15, it becomes a little less practical both to teach and to learn. And so it kind of begs the question of what's the purpose of this, and when is it really necessary? When this isn't to get essentialist. I know a lot of people are essential are or we just need 2 bags and a partner drills and that's it, and you got to just get tougher. I think this goes beyond the kind of that reductionism, because Jeremy kind of introduced me to all this stuff that now I'm having infinitely harder and harder trouble finding and getting and practicing. So, well, not all of it, but most of it.
I think it boils down to what's your purpose for training? Flat out boils down to that. If you're wanting to carry on, the legacies of the art, things like that, then I do think as a goal of that art, then yeah, absolutely, I do believe it is necessary. If that's not your goal, then what's your level of contentment? What amount of knowledge are you content with? And I think that's where it really goes to that point. Whether because I remember the one weapon I always wanted to learn was Noonday bow. Always wanted. I thought, man, that thing is just that is just the cream of the crop. I mean, that's the most awesome weapon I've ever seen anybody work with. And I literally waited 13 years to finally get a chance to even learn it. And whenever I did, I grabbed on and held on tight. It was an interesting ride. I never gave up on it. And it's quite an interesting weapon. Definitely taught me a lot of things, not just about that weapon, but just how I looked at how I do empty hand techniques. And so I think the bottom line is, I think when you're learning something like that, and even though it's rare, I don't think you know what you're going to get out of it. And yeah, definitely that was, and it really changed how I looked at how I do techniques, how I do pretty much everything. I mean, how I bogeyed, how I did everything. It changed everything how I looked at it. You're thinking, how would I change bogey working with a stupid weapon? That only a handful of people do. But one of the best lessons I got learning that weapon was you have almost a 7-foot weapon. How can you work with that weapon, or how can you use that weapon so that people don't see it? How can you conceal a 7-foot weapon? And that goes back to some of my talks on analysis and stuff. It's like, okay, how do I hide a 7-foot weapon? How do I make it look as if it's not 7 feet? And then I started looking at, okay, what angle do I come in with a punch that they don't see it and they don't think that it's, fully extended? And so that's where I started driving this, I guess, in a way, concept. But without feeling it and experiencing it, it's kind of hard to really relay that kind of a lesson to somebody. Stuff like that. And now, as I mentioned, Noonday bow, it's very hard to even find one for sale right now anywhere, just due to supply shortages or supply chain issues over here or wherever. And so and that's kind of one of the reasons why we brought this topic up. Is like, if you're striving to really develop yourself in that art, what about these things that you really can't get anymore? How do you develop yourself that skill without those tools, without that equipment?
Let's go back to what you were just talking about. With kind of learning how to conceal a 7-foot weapon.
Yeah.
Was that something that people who were teaching you Nunti bow try to hammer home, or was that something you kind of picked up as, I don't want to
No,
say ancillary to,
it
or
was
something that just kind of came to you?
no, it was. I mean, I learned the basics on how to work with the weapon, and then after that, whenever we were starting to kind of finesse how it flows and stuff, um, the guy who was teaching me was like, okay, yeah, you can work with it like this, but start thinking of it differently. You got to think totally different. It's like you can't think of it like a bow. I mean, a bow is a bow is a bow is a bow. You got a bow, it's about 6 foot and it's there. He goes, you can conceal that sometimes, but a bow is a bow. And he goes, look, a noonday bow is a noonday bow, but some of the things you can do with it and the way you hold it a little bit different here, a little bit different there, or whenever you go in to strike and you just basically you turn it so that the tines dig in a little bit differently, you can conceal how it's coming into somebody or how it's coming at somebody, things like that. And it goes back in any one of the things he goes, when you're using this weapon, think of it like a pool cue. When the pool cue hits a cue ball, all you see is just that little dot.
Mm.
You're not seeing 4.5 foot stick, getting ready to hammer the cue ball into a bunch of balls. All you're seeing is that dot. He was like, always think of when you're training with the noonday bow, think of it as you're striking with that dot. So he goes, and always wrap your mind around how to make it be the dot, and so, and that's kind of, I thought it was a great lesson. And, like I said, I took it to heart. Not on, I mean, I went back and looked at, I'd say almost everything. Like, okay, how do I make everything look like the dot?
Mm. Because you want to hit with precision, and you want to have that kind of same finesse that you have with the Nunti bow with
Well,
everything else.
well, not just precision, but surprise.
Hmm.
Because I mean, if all you're seeing is just that dot, you don't know what that reach is.
But you've seen people who just try to say, "Oh, you can just do the Nunti bow kata with a regular bow. You don't need it. You don't need a Nunti bow."
You can,
I mean, yeah, if you want to
you
just do the
you
kata.
can, but I think it helps to have that mindset wrapped around it.
So in that way, do you think we can kind of? I think we're just using Nunti bow as an example here.
Yeah,
If we're
yeah.
talking about, but in that way, do you think you can apply that lesson which you got from using Nunti bow into other things that you do, into pretty much applying it to everything else, and then to say, okay, this is what we learned from the Nunti bow, but it's not really a relevant thing. It's harder to get nowadays. Maybe we can learn the cut off a videotape at some point, but this is more of the general lesson we need to pick up from it.
Right. I mean, Sensei always talked about, what's the difference between this and this? You'd stop and he goes, no, same, doesn't matter, same, same. You'd always say same. And technically, looking back on those lessons, it's like, okay, now I understand what he was trying to say. It's not so much how you do the technique. It's not so much what you can do with the technique. It's how your mindset is around what you're doing. Because
But
your mindset's going to be the same with a noonday bow as nunchaku or even cheesies. There are ways to conceive. You take that lesson from noonday bow and you can conceal cheesies. You can do all sorts of stuff, or nunchaku. You definitely conceal that stuff.
even if you're not going for the concealment, right? So that's a lesson you got out of learning that specific weapon.
Right.
But would you feel you would have the same outlook on things if you just said, okay, that weapon's too old? If someone, 20 years ago said, that weapon on the wall, but that weapon's broken. It's kind of a relic. Nobody really knows it anymore. It's not important. We're not walking around with Nunti bow anymore. Just don't worry about it. We're gonna learn other stuff.
I
Focus
mean,
on other things. Do you really think you'd have that same perspective if you didn't have that?
no, I don't. I don't think I would have. I mean, or it would have took me a lot longer to find it. Either way, I mean, it's yeah, it would have taken me a lot longer to find that perspective on that lesson.
Well, and then this gets into like, okay, we get like something like Nunti-Bow, and something like Manji Sai, which are basically like retined Sai. You've got the Rochin and Timbi, which we don't even do. The Surichin, which is like the Chanin robe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have like the Aku, which is essentially a boat oar, which is probably of all of them is probably the easiest one to kind of refashion to a
Right.
degree.
There's certain things with that too
Yeah.
that
Uh,
I learned with that. A lot of it was with the AQ. I would say some of the things I got out of the AQ was more finesse on my techniques overall because you got a 5 and a half foot weapon, and basically one of the things I learned with it wasn't so much striking, it was more how to grapple with the thing. And so, you're thinking, how are you grappling with an AQ? I mean, you've been on the other end of the AQ with me, and I've grappled you and tied you up with it before.
yeah, and I mean, we did that. We did do that, but I don't know. For me, it's like it comes down to the constant question of, okay, there's these things that we're getting out of these weapons,
Right, right,
right?
right.
And I mean, saying like, yeah, of course you can do that. I think you can do grappling if the same principle applies to one, it kind of applies to all,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, and if that's like the case, I mean, in some cases, which ones is it going to work out the best? And this isn't to be like anti Aku grappling or anything,
no, I get it.
but it's more like at what point do we take these lessons and apply it as regular practice versus like do we end up having these weapons to learn these specific as kind of totems to have these specific lessons, or do we need these sort of things in order to get there, right? Because we have the kind of
Yeah,
preservation side of things, right? Like
yeah,
of like everybody's like we need to make sure these katas last on until whenever, and everyone just videotapes things and forgets things, right? That's a
yeah,
kind of a different issue.
yeah,
And then we have people who are like the one or two people who actually practice it every once in a while and remember it. But then there's like people who get something out of it, but do they get something out of it because those weapons brought it out, which seems to be your case? But then how do we make sure that those lessons are imparted with or without those lessons, that with or without those weapons? I mean, that's where I come into it with like,
yeah. No, I totally get it. I think it's personally, I think it's people who have learned those weapons. I think I wouldn't say it's our duty, but it is part of our responsibility to pass that kind of information on and be able to pass those lessons on and be able to know, hey, okay, yeah, I got this from Nunte, like I got this from Nuntebo, but this is how this applies to this. This is how this applies to this. This is how this applies to that. I think being able to see that is one, having somebody be able to see it, two, being able to have that person be able to teach it as well. And that's
yeah,
not easy.
no, and here's the thing where it's like in our situation we've had these learned, right? How many of these situations have been people who kind of natively understand these weapons inside of a school versus people who are going to a camp or a seminar and be like, hey, I want to learn that thing, and oh, I don't have the weapon and I don't have anybody back home who knows it. And then they get home and they're like, I don't know this thing, and they just kind of forget it, and then it just becomes this thing that everyone tries to chase, and
Well,
which is where kind of like the vanishing point of the preservationists
yeah,
kind of become, where it's like, all right, we've preserved it. At what
yeah.
cost? Like,
Well, yeah. I mean, I do think they do need to be. I mean, I think it does need to be preserved just for context. But yeah, you do make a point. You know, if somebody's not committed to really learning how the weapon works, then what good is it? Then why do it? I
yeah.
mean,
And now,
if
with
it's
even more of the issue of like, I don't even think it's a matter of like the supply chain at this point. It's more of like the number of people who are able to actually do a weapon. Like the most suppliers on the Manji side, more or less off the table.
yeah,
It don't sell. Like people
no,
don't buy it,
no,
right? Nuntibo, same. Like it's a even harder track to go up,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, Agu, a little bit easier, but
yeah.
you know,
But yeah, it's still pretty rare to find anything.
and like and kind of the other more niche ones. I mean, they're kind of still like left off in their nativisms, and whether or not they go out into the kind of a wider practice is kind of something altogether, something different altogether. So
Yeah, yeah. I guess it really like I said, it really gets into somebody's commitment. Whether they really want to learn, is it just as you mentioned, hey, I've got a cool weapon on my wall, woohoo, yay, or is it more, yeah, I know how to work with this, I know how to make this work, and that's and I think people really need to really ask ask themselves, be honest. What is it that you're really wanting out of your training? Period.
and what is the point of like having this weapon when it's a novelty? I think it's just kind of something we're definitely against, is like this
Yeah.
becoming a novelty, because it's really not. Like it's sad when you see people who can't do anything else but the kata,
Yeah.
right? Like
Hmm.
it's sad when we see that, which is when that thing, just in general. It's
Hmm.
even worse when you have like people who are like, wow, I'm going to learn this cool thing, and the only thing they can do with it, the only conceivable thing they've got in their head is, oh, I'll just do the kata. All right, I did the kata, right?
I mean, obviously that's a place to start, but it's like, what are you
Well,
going to learn from it?
yeah, and then it's like, if you can integrate that. This is my thing when I think of when I'm now as I'm personally getting back more closely into my training and trying to vary it up and trying to change it up a little, and kind of look at different things. Okay, what's the point of just having these things inside of your training, right? Like I got our friend of the podcast, Sal, handsomest man alive. He does the steel mace, the steel mace stuff. I was looking at some of the stuff he did. I'm like, hey, that's basically stuff I do with the Joe. That's stuff I do with the bow. I see a lot of like bow and Joe, and like some Nunti stuff in there. And basically, it's like it's weighted. Like Nunti's probably is probably kind of the same way to it, right? And it's like, if okay, could I just kind of drop a lot of the Kobudo and just do that? And it was funny when I was talking to him on here, oh, almost a year ago now. He was like, "Yeah, we have a regular Kobudo class. We have karate students and we have Kobudo students, and we have some Kobudo students who aren't karate students. And you don't see that a lot, do you?"
No,
Um,
I, I guess yeah, I do know some places that do that, but in order to
that's
have well-rounded training, I think you need both. I mean, you truly need to understand, I mean, both sides of it,
but
because
they
I think
yeah I personally would agree, but I mean, there's some people who want to pursue one or the other. But that goes to your point where it's like, all right, what do you want to get out of your training? What do you want to, what are things you want to take away from it? The pure Kobudo people want that that type of Kobudo training. Now, could you imagine if like you're introducing weapons and introducing things to do with them, right? Not just simply doing a kata or doing a
Yeah.
form or walking through a pattern. Um, I don't know if you remember us doing this, and I kind of thought it was a little silly, but it was. This is something I felt it was good to kind of get a feel for balance. I know it was stupid and a little dangerous, but there is a kind of the Aku circle pass. Do you
Oh,
remember this? It was a little silly.
kind of.
Yeah, it's like basically you're kind of like feeling both sides of the Aku, and then you kind of like literally fling it to somebody else, and they're supposed to kind of like go with the flow of it, like go up and down with it, and then like
Oh,
flip it to another person. Now, speaking now, not like 15 years ago, it probably wouldn't do something like that because I don't really think it's, relevant or helpful. Though it was kind of fun to kind of like to launch an Echo at someone and scream, "Don't drop my Echo!" Um, yeah, it was fun, but I mean, ultimately kind of unproductive. Um, but
well, I
I
mean,
don't know
it's
if that's a symptom of not knowing what to do with something, or trying to teach people a lesson without knowing what the lesson is,
wait,
or
I
what it was. But I mean, I
mean,
feel like that's a product of kind of this conversation, or like a byproduct of this type of
yeah,
conversation.
I don't. I mean, I kind of. I mean, what I think the takeaway would be is here, surprise, you've got something now to use. Try to use it. How,
Mm,
especially if you've never picked up something like that. Now, would I do that with a Nunte bow? No,
no,
no.
yeah,
Now, would I hand it to somebody and try to let them try to figure out how to at least work with it? Okay, kind of get a little bit of a feel for it. Okay, I can kind of agree with that a little bit, but
mm,
yeah, I mean that's kind of what I would see the lesson would really be out of that, which technically is not a bad lesson if that's what you're going for. If you really didn't know what you're going for, it's kind of like, why are you doing it?
yeah,
And and sometimes you go back and look at training and like, why did I do that? Why did I do this? Why did I punch the Makawara 200 times until blood hit the floor? It's like, what? What was I thinking? I mean, different things like that. So,
yeah. But I think that's kind of where this conversation ends up. Is it's just we're at a point right now where some of these weapons are becoming just less and less available,
yes,
and it's going to be harder and harder to teach them in the future. And we're not trying to be like boomers or anything. Like, damn, Brandon's not picking up the supply chain or whatever. Like, it's nothing like that. It's just more like this is just the facts of where the art is now and where it's most likely gonna keep going
yeah.
for the foreseeable future. So, I mean, do you
We're,
think that there's a productive way of addressing this that keeps preservation well in hand, but also puts us more towards practicality?
no, I think it gets back to kind of what we were talking about. It's more along the lines of being able to get a hold of people who have worked with it and do know these lessons from these different weapons or tools or equipment,
Mm,
and being able to share their experiences like this and try to be able to show what they're talking about with something else, whether it be empty hand technique, whether it be some other weapon, whether it be whatever, so
mm.
yeah.
I can go there. I can get behind that. I think also it's important to be able to show that you can go into these weapons with a pretty good intent as long as it's not just the sole intent of the kata.
Yeah.
That in fact, like if you're, what a friend of ours once told me, kind of kept on bragging to me. It's like, I don't know comma, but I could use a comma if I needed to. I'm like, do you want me to teach you the comma kata? Like, I can teach you the comma kata. Do you want to learn the comma kata? I know it.
Yeah.
And he's just like, nah, no, but it's just, but do you want to learn the comma kata? Like, really? You sure? Nobody in present company, mind you, but
Yeah.
it's just more like the feeling of being able to use something but with not knowing the actual like basis behind it,
Yeah.
which is where you get a lot of people who do Kobudo who know the form and like, yeah, I get it, and like you see them try to do the Kobudo in some sort of any sort of fashion, and they just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Um,
Or ask them to do a technique and you end up just shaking your head and it's like, okay, that was a nice try. Let's try again.
it's not
But
1800 anymore. We're not riding horses with a tonka.
well, I mean, okay. Well, let's look at it a little bit different. I mean, yeah, most people are not going to take cheesy kumbo with them, wherever they go. I get that. Little handheld, little sticks. But okay, you got your keys, you got your cell phone, you got different things like that. If you understand certain techniques with that, maybe you can apply it to those things. Now, I do miss my one phone that had like a giant antenna on that sucker. It had about like a 2-3 inch, really hard antenna. And we were doing a demo one time in a class. It was like, what good can you do with a cell phone? And I'm like, come here. And boom, I nailed them right in the neck and knocked them down. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. And yeah, it's kind of cool. I kind of wish my cell phone had that still. I mean, it's probably killer, man. That was pretty awesome.
It's probably the next evolution of this is just cell phones that are like going to be like programmable to becoming like I don't know,
I've seen the cell
some
phone
sort of
covers.
weapon.
I've seen the cell phone covers that are stun guns. I think those are like, hey, no, that's pretty awesome. I don't care who you are.
Cell phone holster wallet. You don't want to mix that up.
It works on the subway and on your dog too. All right, yeah. It's no, now, don't take that wrong. I love my dog, but just sometimes a little electric shock therapy will get them back in line. So it's
Okay, Caesar the dog whisperer. Uh, we get on here, and Jeremy's like, yeah, we'll do this in like 15 minutes. We're 2 hours in, and now we're got a Caesar reference in there.
yeah, that's cool. Anyway.
Cool. Anyway, anything else we can maybe say about this or say in closing?
No, I mean, I think we pretty well covered it pretty well. I mean, those, those are the main things I think are the takeaways from it. So
Yeah, and just to keep working on what you're working on.
yeah,
Like I think that's the biggest thing where it's like people want to learn something, but it's like wanting the new toy. It's like, but you have what you have right now. You don't want to do like you want to do something new. I understand that, but you have to look at what you have at the moment and make that training work for you, right?
yeah. I mean, be content with what you got. 'Cause, I mean, that helps you in the long run. So
Rather than trying to pursue something else and not get it or be bad at it, and then now you're also bad at the other stuff.
yeah,
So
exactly.
that would help you more. But, oh,
Just
cool. Jeremy, any plant and training plans for this week?
I I should be able to get back on schedule. I mean, my big implementations have kind of calmed down a little bit, so that's a good thing. So
All right. Cool. Cool. Well, I'm hopefully keeping on this stretch for a little while. But we'll see what happens. Cool. Well, Jeremy, thank you for joining me, and everybody, thanks for listening. And yeah, I hope everyone's doing well, and everybody keep on training.